of reminders of what to tell everyone. Okay, so good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I am Miranda Driver, and I am with the Organic Fertilizer Association of California. We are excited to have you here today. We're going to keep it pretty short and sweet, I think. Basically, what we're going to do is we got a Healthy Soils grant to do a cover crop trial. And today we are going to be presenting the results of that trial. This is a follow-up webinar to an in-person presentation that was done where people actually went to the field and saw the cover crops in person. So we're going to, Brian with Lockwood Seed, he's the one that administered the cover crop trial on our behalf, and he has photos and he's going to be presenting it. Just a couple quick housekeeping things. At the end, everyone who attended, if you're here to get any CCA units, we'll be sending out those QR codes afterwards. Additionally, there's some polls that we're going to need you to interact with. And then I believe we're going to be sending a survey that we're going to need you to fill out as well. Once again, the Healthy Soils program was funded by CDFA, and this cover crop trial was completely funded by them. So we have to recognize that. So without further ado, I'm going to let Brian go ahead and start his presentation. Brian, take it away.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me today. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone, and it's good to see everybody here, even though it's through the computer screen. I'm much better at in-person speaking, so if I get talking too fast, or I believe last time I didn't have a video going, if you have any questions, please shoot it out on the Q&A or on the chat, and we'll make sure we get things done correctly. But again, with that, I'm Brian Loesch with Lockwood Seed Grain, and had this cover crop presentation for the last 3 years to show our data and trials from the Healthy Soils grant that we received to try and show the benefits of cover crops into orchards. Our goal of this is to basically capture carbon and build the soils up in an effort to get better returns through orchards, maintaining healthy soils to maximize water returns, and hopefully get better yields. That's the name of the game of what we're trying to do here. The trial that we started in year 2020 and just completed with shredding and terminating here this last week. And we're pretty excited to show off some of the work we did. I was pretty impressed with some of the before and after photos. It's definitely fun to watch how this has progressed over the last couple of years. Our goal for starting these cover crops is always about planting time. If we can get a good establishment, we have much better success. This is a picture that we started when we did our first year, January 14th, 2020. Our goal was to get them planted by October 15th, but we had a little problem. We had some rain, the ground got wet, we couldn't get out there. The farmer had to do some things. It almost looked like racing slicks on our planter here as we were driving the tractor through the field. And then in 2020, we were in December again, trying to get things going a little bit quicker. And then last year we had a big rain in October. And then the farmer had to do some pruning and some cultural work. We couldn't get out there. December 11th was the earliest window that we had available. When we talk about planting, we always talk about seeding placement. My fear is that seeds are planted too shallow and then we catch a rain and or wind and it's not enough to get the crop established, but it's enough to start it and then it won't make it. The importance of that depth is about good seed to soil contact. If you can get that root to be 1/4 to 1/2 inch in the ground and it can hook in and maintain good contact, it'll be able to survive a whole bunch of tough conditions, especially like the last couple of days. We've had these big winds. Anything that was planted too shallow could be in real trouble. Or if it's too deep and it gets too cold, it might not come out of the ground. We had that issue in January this year as it was really dry and cold. Some of the smaller seeds took a little bit of a tough start and all of the larger seeds did better. Coming back through this, as the ground is changing a little bit, you have to maintain a good coverage in the seed trench. If seeds are open or if you can plant it deep enough, but you don't have good coverage over the top, it can be difficult for establishment as well. And that develops the whole plant health. As the crowns develop better, you get better tillering, much better crops if you have things done in the right fashion as far as getting the seed placed. So I'm a big fan of pictures. I like to put some pictures with things to show off what we're talking about. This is that same orchard where that first picture was just taken and it was being planted. You can see how they had prunings down the middle. We had to wait for those to get shredded. And then we had that 5 inches of rain in October. Gosh, the rows were so sticky you couldn't hardly go out there without sliding even in your regular work boots. And then we had a little bit of volunteer vegetation starting to grow as we were planting, as that stuff was probably 1 to 2 inches tall as we were going along. So we had sticky ground, a lot of crop residue. Kind of makes a challenging program if you're trying to get something planted. This is an ideal seed bed as we got going. This is the same row that we just took the big picture of. If you kind of look here and see if I can get my pointer to show, we had a good seed bed here. The seeds are actually down in there. You might see one once in a while, but everything was covered up nice and fluffy. We were able to cut through some of the volunteering vegetation. And if there was any hard spots, we went right through it. You can see here at the bottom, you can see there's a little bit of an open trench. And that's just one of those little spots we try and avoid that. That's what we talk about with that open trench there. If we drag something behind, and I'm not sure if you can see my mouse or my pointer going. Does it show up where everybody can see it? Anyway, this is kind of an ideal situation when we get done. If the ground is too wet and leaves these little open trenches, then we'll actually go through and we can drag a chain right behind the planter to help cover that up. And that's the biggest thing for our ideal seed bed. We want to plant the seeds at the right depth, but we want one pass. We want to make this easy, want to make it smooth, want to make it fast and efficient. And when we do all that, that's what makes it work. This is a picture of that same row with our planter going through, and you can see where we actually were planting in the rows, especially where there was the residue from the prunings. It made it a little bit challenging in some spots if it was thick, where we had some moisture underneath. The ground was a little bit muddy. You can see on the back of our wheels, we had a little bit of sweat. For the most part, everything worked well. If you look on the drill, we have two little foot pegs. Sometimes if it's really sticky, we can drag a chain behind to help cover and tumble some of those small soil clods and stuff to try and fill that trench if we need to. In this particular case, we didn't. It seemed to work just fine. It's neat to also watch these pictures as we progress. In 2020, when we were doing these trials, we had a control row where we didn't plant anything between the rows. In 2020, we didn't mow it. There was not enough vegetation to even take weight samples. We couldn't even basically get it to register. If we did try and cut stuff, it wouldn't even register on our scale. Where we had water through rain events and or sprinklers, micros, after just a few hours of running, the water would seal off and run right down the rows. Also, you can see where the soil kind of cracked and had pancakes. There's basically no pollinator activity. Pretty tough event there. In 2021, you can still see the same tire tracks. Once they made the tire tracks and the prints, it was pretty challenging. You couldn't get rid of them. You can see some of the small pancakes there of the soil surface cracking, minimal vegetation growth, and you can see the cover crops on both sides had some pretty good growth. Pretty interesting there. A lot of our almond orchards, everybody likes to keep a very minimal center, but this is a little bit too light. I don't think this is a good way to go. It's almost a scorched earth policy, if you will. I try and avoid this in my line of work, and I think it really helps to have more vegetation growing there. In 2022, you can see where the trees finally got bigger, and you can see where we actually had some vegetation come through. The majority of it was cheeseweed. It probably got about knee high. Didn't go all the way across the rows and didn't go all the way down, but it was in what I would call patchier segments. We did finally get some biomass weights from it, and it was kind of interesting to see how that worked out. Definitely interesting. Definitely something that showed green material, but when we show you the numbers, it was pretty impressive to see the difference between them. In 2020, when the orchard was baby, our SR mix, which was a combination of brassicas, legumes, and cereals, it got fairly tall, probably above your belt buckle, maybe between belt buckle and shoulder height. Had really nice growth to it. Excellent stand all the way across, very uniform. It was fun to watch it grow. In 2021, it was a little bit shorter. Didn't get very much rain in January and February. A little bit colder, I think, too. Anyway, overall, excellent rows, excellent coverage as you go through, very uniform. But it just was, I was hoping for a little bit more out of it, but all in all, pretty good start for what was taking place. And then when we get to 2022, it really filled in. We caught some rains in December. Even though we were a little bit dry in January and February, it really did shine with its deep root. The mustards and the brassicas in the mix definitely got bigger than the other things. I think it was because those roots are deeper and tapped into moisture. When we had kind of a dry January, February, those were able to still develop and grow. If you can look at the bottom where we did the little mow section there, you can actually see there was the cereals growing underneath the canopy. If we'd have had maybe a little bit more rain in January and February, or if those micro sprinklers could reach the middle when they did irrigate, I think you'd have seen probably a little more cereal growth out of it. In other areas with solid set sprinklers, we did. But all in all, a very nice row, very uniform. And even though we only planted it 5 foot wide, as the plants were reaching for more sunlight and more growth, they definitely expanded out towards the edge of the row and filled into a very nice cover crop. And even though it was fairly growthy, it still mowed very easy. Most of these things are hollowed stems. The mower went through no problem at all. Never even slowed down. Everything just mowed just like it was a garden. Our Max Organic Builder was one of the other rows that we did along with the SR mix. In 2020, you can see it was fairly low to the ground. Didn't get very tall with the weather that we had, but had a very nice thick stand. It's a blend of oats and legumes, bell beans, peas, and vetch. This is one of our favorite crops that we use throughout the years, and especially here in the North State with our soil types. And it was definitely a good show to watch this one progress as well. In 2021, it had an excellent plant population, but it just never quite got the same height. An inch of rain in January or December would have really made a nice difference, would have really had things elongate, and definitely would have been a little bit higher yielding as far as biomass. But as we got to 2022, you can definitely see the difference. Definitely got taller. The oats performed very well. Some of the bell beans in there, they were present, but they really got burned back on the tops and their growing points. The same frost that hit the almond crop through most of the North State. The peas did very well and were definitely about the same height as the oats. And the vetches were just starting to push. They were about the top of your boots, maybe mid shin. A little bit more rain in February, and I think the vetch would have probably even doubled in size. So a very good start to the year, very high yielding, even though it was not as tall as the SR mix in the row behind it. Still very similar in weights. When we harvested in 2022, we take a representative sample of multiple rows, and then we average the weights between them. In the control row, but we never even harvested the first 2 years, we were able to get 11.11 tons of green material as we were able to harvest it. We never even got yields from it the previous 2 years. There wasn't enough there. It was just open row, sterile soil. The SR mix, the one with the mustards that had the grasses and the legumes down inside of it, this year went 30.55 tons of green material per acre, basically your own compost level going right on top of the ground. And that Max Organic Builder, even though it was probably less than half the height, was still at 27.77 tons green material. We're waiting on our results to come back from the labs for moistures, but we'll have that moisture corrected when we send out a summary sheet and data as we get finished with this. This is a picture of last year's termination, April 10th. This year we terminated on April 7th. We collect the samples for weight, moisture, take soil tests to confirm what we see in the soil as far as organic matter and N, P, and K values. And the biggest thing is, even though we had all that growth, belt buckle height to shoulder height, depending on the crop and the year, a very clean environment for orchard preparation. Whether you're getting ready for a crop for harvest this year, it should be a very clean middle and should have no issues at all for harvest coming behind the cover crops. This is a picture of what was left from 2021 with the SR mix. You can see when we mowed it, it had about 4 inches of some stubble in some spots, but most of it was right down on the ground. That came out at 25 green tons per acre at 75% moisture correction, or 2.5 tons at 100% dry matter. So that was pretty good from last year to this year. Even though we had a tough January and a tough February, we were still 5 ton to the acre above it with a green weight. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how those weights come out with the moisture activity this year, especially with the bee activity that we had. We had a tremendous pollination this year with the open weather that we had. And I think the SR mix really showed that benefit this year, having those pollinators another place to work and live when they weren't in the almonds. And this year we probably had the mustards bloom 10 days or so, maybe 2 weeks behind the almonds. We got planted a little bit late. If we can get that mustard to get planted the first week of October to second week of October, the mustards and the almonds should bloom at about the same time. And we've seen only benefits from that. We're not taking any bees out of the orchard. I believe it's helping the bees have some different forages and letting them move a little bit farther. It's been a pretty interesting show on that. We've had quite a positive response. Even with all this material, most of the residue is dissolved within 2.5 weeks in one irrigation. And you especially saw it with the micros. You could really see where we had the cover crop available. That water would definitely penetrate more compared to the bare areas where the tire tracks, compaction, and water would just run right off after the sprinkler started for a couple hours. The Max Organic Builder a year ago had 14.4 green tons, 75% moisture. Again, this year we were up a little bit. I think the definite batch of rain that we did have, we had just a little bit more at this orchard at this time compared to the year previous. Definitely a good show. Definitely a little bit less stem here than with some of the brassicas involved. The oats and the bell beans and vetch are definitely finer stemmed. I think it definitely made a little bit more of a mat, but it definitely dissolved very rapidly once we got it down and mowed and the sprinklers hit it. A lot of our issues have been talked about on some of our growers when we had the field day a couple of days ago. Frost, what is your concern about frost versus, bare middles? We did not see a serious loss in this crop in this orchard where we did have the cover crops. I think there was some moisture in the ground. I think it did help. We have seen some frost line in some orchards where you can see right to the line where things go down. But I think the overall benefit in this particular orchard that we were in, even though it was cold, they still have a crop there. They did have some access. They had water running. They ran it hard for about 5 days when it was super cold. And they had a helicopter running in the block next to them. Did it help? Probably, all things considered, helped a little bit. Some fields took it better than others this year. It's ugly in some of our Northern California orchards, but some of them have hung on, and this is one that did. It does have a crop still in it. As far as pests, we haven't seen any major pest issues. They did run through one time and spray earlier. They just drove right through the cover crop. Didn't have any issues. It seemed to leave a little bit of a track, but for the most part, everything filled back in and was pretty similar to anything else that they would do. Water requirements, they did catch an irrigation at the end of last year as they were trying to finish things up. And then we got that big 5 inches of rain. So we did not plant till December. And then come springtime, they basically did not water it. They watered just for what the orchard needed. And then when that cold event hit, they really did get some water on it for about 5 days where they ran the micros just as hard and long as they can. And I think it seemed to help out really well. Some of our growers were definitely concerned about crop competition. They were afraid that, with cover crops being there, competing for daylight, competing for water, especially as we get into March and April. The grower in this field has been doing an excellent job of watering for the orchard. I'm not thinking that we were taking anything away from the root zone. The trees are just starting to get out probably 3 or 4 feet in the canopy off the edge of the middles. And that was right up to the edge of the cover crop line. I think we did nothing but help store water. Every percent of organic matter we can get in the soil is going to give them an extra 12 inches of water holding capacity in that soil. And I think we made an excellent case for giving them some biomass, giving them some root growth, keeping that ground soft so those brace roots and feeder roots can get out and go reach for more nutrients to cycle. And costing wise, we'll have a list of what some of these things would cost if guys are planting them. But I would say that we're probably in most of these planting areas for about $50 a planted acre. It sounds like a lot till you realize that we're not planting the whole orchard. And when we do the math, it was actually a little bit cheaper than what most of our customers were expecting when we talked face to face. So it was definitely a good show for quite a few of our people. And that was our deal too. We like to plant at 100 pounds per acre. I think that seems like probably the best planting rate for density and getting roots developed. And if we did have a tough start with germination, either north wind or frost event or something cold, we've had some of our customers plant at 40 pounds per acre, and they still had a pretty good solid stand this year, even with all the challenges we faced in January, February, and a couple of those cold events that we had. This is a picture of our field day from last week. I was really excited to see everybody out there, seeing everybody in person. It sure is nice to get out and look at things. This was a picture from our control row, and it sure is a different view from some of those pictures I've showed you, or if you've seen this presentation before. The trees have gone from babies to absolutely starting to shake hands. They look really good. We're seeing excellent trunk size. I think that's part of the overall conditions of the North State we've had. I think it's partially because our cover crops have looked good out there. And I think it's because the grower here has been really good on his timing. Things are definitely coming together well. getting everybody out in the field, we were able to really show the differences of these things side by side, and we were able to take a shovel and actually dig holes a foot deep and dig and see what the roots look like. And I was really interested to show where we had some tire tracks, we had some footprints, we saw some areas where there's some compaction starting to show. We saw some areas where you could definitely tell there was more residue from years past. And as our control row was showing too, there was some material out there, but you could definitely see where it'd been empty in the years past, and it was definitely a different look. So it was definitely a good show, and hopefully we can do this again someday and get more people involved to come see it. I'm a huge fan of having everybody come to see it, get your hands on it, be able to touch it. Sure does make it a nice effort that way. Kind of to review, we had a 3-year trial on this. We've had soil tests taken every year. We've had biomass weights taken every year. We were supposed to have a field day every year, but thanks to COVID, that's been basically limited to Zoom for the last 2 years up until this year. And hopefully we'll have our lab weights and lab results back from next week, so we'll be able to publish results, have a hard trial, so we can show numbers to people about, hey, this is how many tons of biomass we're able to create. This is how much carbon we're able to capture. This is how much we're trying to benefit the soil. I'm a huge fan of organic matter, compost growing in, being able to put things into the soil. That's basically your grocery bank to come back out. If we can get organic matter to go into that soil and stay there, we're going to get more porosity. We're going to be able to get water available, better nutrient cycling. And I think my take home message from this whole thing is if you can see the plant on top of the ground, the roots are an equal weight in the soil. So some of these cover crops that are taller, belt buckle high, heavy tonnages, the roots are there. The roots are in the ground. They're making things more available. We're basically fixing carbon. We're trying to get that soil to be healthier by allowing your P and K to be released. Better uptake to the overall tree, and doing that without getting in the way of the farming practices, not being in the way for tree cultivation or tree cultivational practices. If you have any pest control, water requirements, and hopefully making it easy so everybody can benefit from it. And I think we're going to show that. I think it's going to be a good show when we get done. And so with that, I've talked a lot. I want to say thank you again for your time, and I'd love to answer any questions, or if anybody has any questions or ideas that we can help and share, love to visit about it. And thank you guys for your time again. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Brian. As Brian mentioned, if anyone has questions, now's the time. You can put them in the chat or in the Q&A, and we will get those answered. Brian, do you have your contact information handy on a PowerPoint at all?
I don't, but I can get it going here. And I believe that we're going to be handing a mailer, a postcard, and probably an email event out with our results. And as we do that, I'll also make sure we get that out. So both today and in the future, we can let people reach out, or if they have any questions, love to show anything we can to help this.
Yeah, okay. Well, so with that, seeing that there aren't any questions. Oh, here's a question. For someone looking to start, is there an easy mix to start with for cover crops?
I would say the easiest way to start is to basically get something planted as early as possible, as long as the soil is not too hard. I've had people actually broadcast it. I've had people just grain drill it. Almost everything that we're planting in these rows is probably 95% germination or higher. So it's very easy to establish most of these things, especially the smaller seeded stuff, the SR mix, that max organic. We've flown it onto hillsides where they have erosion and or fires, and it's taken a hold. So if you can have a drill or a broadcaster and you can get it in with one pass, hopefully an inch deep or half-inch deep, I think it'll be pretty easy to start it. I prefer a drill if we have one, or if you can beg, borrow, steal if you have one yourself. You don't need anything specialized. No-tills are great, but we have a lot of our farmers just use a regular John Deere grain drill as long as it's double disc opener. Seems to work out pretty well.
Okay, it looks like the next question was, does broadcasting work as well as using a drill? And I think you kind of answered that.
Well, the thing with broadcasting, if the orchard is very young and the soil's still soft, then yes, it seems to work pretty well. After about year 1 or 2, though, as you're going on to the later years, a drill is definitely better because those middles are a little bit harder. And I just don't want to disturb that middle too much. We might prune some roots or get a disease in there if we got too deep, if we worked it up. So yes, early it's pretty good, but later it's better to drill if possible.
Okay. Wonderful. Since there's no more questions, oh wait, they're still coming in. What about using the min mature orchards?
Oh, yeah, in mature orchards, I actually have a picture here. If you guys could bear with me for just a second, if I'm smart enough to do this. We've actually had some pictures where we've put them in older orchards, and I took it out here just because it wasn't part of what our normal talk was. But let's see if we can show this. Is this showing up here a little bit better?
It is.
If you can see this, this is one of our older, more mature orchards, planted in the October 10th zone. Solid set sprinklers going all the way across, and then they mow it fairly early in an effort to try and get it to grow several times without being too tall for frost risk, obviously, but also they just don't want to get it up that high into the canopy. And we've had some pretty good success with that. What's really been interesting is if they did have to do any bloom sprays, and if it did get wet, that cover crop was really absorbing it. And you can see where they've got the tire tracks kind of down the way. In the runway, though, they weren't making a lot of compaction. That little bit of grass with the fibrous root system really softened up the ground, really softened up the rows where they could get on the ground quickly, but it didn't leave a footprint. Really helpful for these guys.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you, Brian, for presenting those. As Brian said, after we get the lab results back, we're going to be sending out some information about the trials. For now, though, I think we're going to wrap up today. Just a couple of quick housekeeping things. When this webinar ends, you're going to get a survey. If you could please fill it out, that would be very much appreciated. Additionally, if you're here for CCA hours, and I know there's a couple people on the phone, if we have your email, we're going to we can send you the QR code. But if you're on the phone, we might not have your email. So if you don't get the CCA QR code, if you could go ahead and email organicfertilizerassociation@gmail.com, we'll be sure to get you that QR code for the CCA hours. We just put that in the chat for everyone else. Also, if you have any other questions, that is also the appropriate email to send questions to, and then we can put you in touch with Brian, who can probably answer more specifically questions about, different types of cover crops and the results of the trials, and any sort of expertise that might be needed, he would be able to provide. With that, I think that wraps it up. Again, thank you for attending. We really appreciate your time. I'm trying to, Brian, you don't have your info handy, do you? I don't have it handy.
I don't.
Okay.
I don't, but I will get that going forward, and we'll be ready for the next one.
Yeah. So if you just want to say your email address for people, just.
Yes, my email is brian.loesch@lockwoodseed.com, or a contact number would be 530-934-2157. Love to answer any questions. Greatly appreciate everybody's time on this today, and we'd love showing off and talking about these things. I do believe it really helps, especially in young soils, and it sure is a nice time to get everyone to be able to see things. If we can show anybody a little bit of something to make it more successful, we'd love to anytime.
Okay, awesome. So we went ahead and put Brian's email address into the chat as well for everyone to see if you want to reach out to him sooner rather than later. But with that, I think we are done for the day. And once again, thank you for attending. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.